Ferrari gave its best during the pre-season testing session at the 5.412-kilometer Bahrain International Circuit in Scuderia. However, the balance issues suffered seem to have somewhat dampened the immense enthusiasm that characterized the eve of the 2025 Formula One season, largely due to the arrival of Lewis Hamilton. The overall performance in Formula One testing does not award any title or points, yet it seemed clear that the new car from the prancing horse did not fully satisfy the Maranello engineers and drivers. The garage door was lowered half an hour before the end of the last test day, not a good image to see. However, despite this, it should not necessarily be interpreted negatively. The Maranello team had completed its work program, completing 382 complex laps over the 3 days of testing. This distance is more than enough to continue what has already begun in parallel at the factory during the tests. Studying the data gathered from the more than 2,067 kilometers covered at the Scuderia circuit in this crucial phase of the car's life cycle data correlation. There is an interesting point that must once again be brought up here considering the apparent technical discontinuity of the SF-25 single-seater. The historic Maranello-based team, during the design phase of the SF-25, preferred to explore new technical solutions capable of providing better performance, rather than evolving the previous technical project whose virtues were known but also its limits. This is a diametrically opposite approach, for example, to Red Bull's, which in the RB21 sought solutions to the performance downgrade seen in the second part of the 2024 Formula One season, without drastically changing, at least on a large scale, the aerodynamic philosophy that brought them success and titles during the ground effect car era. While the Milton Keynes team seems to be dealing with the issues of last season, the technical discontinuity of Ferrari in Formula One forces the engineers to study the aeromechanical behavior of the 677 project. This is work expected by the Maranello team led by Frederic Vasseur, and it should not turn into the stereotypical "we need to understand" reminiscent of Mattia Binotto's time at the top of the Ferrari racing department. After all, exactly 12 months ago, no one would have bet that McLaren could win the constructors' title. So clear was Red Bull's dominance during the opening round of the previous season in Bahrain. Therefore, Ferrari has to focus on the possibility of overturning the performance hierarchies observed a few weeks ago at the Bahrain International Circuit in Scuderia. We know that in the 2025 Formula One season, time will be tight, as yet another regulatory revolution will force the teams to divide their personnel and aerotest resources between developing the current car and designing the futuristic cars for the 2026 championship. To make a long story short, without too many words, there will not be much time available if they need to make up a significant gap against the competition. Unlike previous seasons, the championship will begin in Australia at the 5.278-kilometer Albert Park Grand Prix circuit, in less than a week from now in Melbourne. In recent years, Formula One fans and paddock insiders could quickly understand who had been playing hide-and-seek during testing, as the opening race of the season was always held at the Scuderia circuit. Last year, the historic Italian team, despite not shining on the circuit near Manama, triumphed in the Australian Grand Prix, achieving an unexpected victory and even a 1-2 finish with Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, despite Max Verstappen's retirement due to an issue with his right rear brake. This is why the hypothetical performance hierarchies emerging from testing could be quickly overturned. On the other hand, the Melbourne Street Circuit is quite atypical, one of the most peculiar tracks on the entire Formula One calendar. In the upcoming first race of the season, Pirelli will supply the dry weather compounds C3, C4, and C5. It is important to note that Ferrari, as well as all other teams, will be testing the soft C5 tire for the first time. The tire compounds and the completely different weather conditions in Australia could shuffle the cards and mitigate the balance issues shown by the SF-25, both with the Monegasque Charles Leclerc and the 7-time world champion of Formula One. Not to mention the work done in the simulator, updated with the data gathered by Ferrari during the Bahrain tests. Starting the season with the right approach on a track where the SF-24 shone is an opportunity for the Maranello engineers, as, regardless of the progress made by the tires, they will be able to appreciate the performance difference compared to the car that won in Australia last year, with the recovering Carlos Sainz. We know that Ferrari feels quite prepared and does not rule out the idea of fighting for the win to fuel their primary objective. Ferrari's focus is therefore already on the Melbourne weekend at the Albert Park circuit, where the two red cars are expected to be major contenders. Team principal Frederic Vasseur assessed the situation in a recent interview with the Italian media. After previously stating at the SF-25 presentation that Ferrari is aiming for both world titles, the Frenchman now seems more cautious in his judgments, aware that Ferrari will have to fight against McLaren, which, after the Bahrain tests, appears a step ahead of the rest. Reflecting on the previous season, Frederic Vasseur acknowledged that while Ferrari had performed well, there was still room for improvement. He emphasized that performance was never the result of a single factor and that no magic formula existed for progress. However, he remained optimistic, noting that the team had made significant strides in recent years and needed to continue in the same direction. When asked by the Italian journalist about his expectations for Melbourne, the French manager refrained from giving a direct answer. He downplayed the importance of the opening race of the season, pointing out that the championship would be a long and demanding battle. The former Alfa Romeo team principal noted that Melbourne's temporary circuit would evolve considerably over the weekend, potentially leading to unpredictable results. He also highlighted the variety of conditions awaiting the teams in the early rounds, from the cold temperatures in China and Japan to the extreme heat of Bahrain. Given these fluctuations, Ferrari planned to use the first 5 races to assess its true competitive level. Despite the intense anticipation surrounding Lewis Hamilton's arrival, Frederic Vasseur recognized the natural challenges of integrating into a new team. The Ferrari team principal explained that adapting to a different environment required time, as a driver had to familiarize himself with new colleagues, working methods, processes, and even details like the steering wheel layout. However, he was confident that Hamilton had managed this transition well, describing the Bahrain preseason testing session as an intense but productive 3-day period for the 7-time champion. In his view, Lewis Hamilton was now fully prepared for the season opener in Melbourne. Frederic Vasseur made it clear that Ferrari had no hierarchy between its drivers, affirming that both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were capable of winning races and competing for the championship. The Maranello team's main goal, he stated, was to secure victories with both drivers, though a clearer picture of their championship prospects would only emerge in the latter half of the 2025 Formula One season. Looking ahead, the Frenchman anticipated one of the most competitive F1 championships in decades. He pointed out that 4 teams had finished the previous year in close contention and were now determined to fight for the title. For Ferrari, he stressed, the key to success would lie in developing the car effectively and working closely with the drivers to maximize performance. Ultimately, he acknowledged, the true balance of power would only become evident on the track.